Economist here. So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about how there is no jobs and no place to live. Now, I know this is not the case for everybody, but it definitely feels that way for a lot of people out there. Is that the real estate industry and the condition that we are now facing when it comes to home ownership is very difficult for most people. And a lot of times we have this kind of belief and this understanding that we should be able to buy a house, not really thinking about whether or not the conditions are in a situation in which that we could buy a house. We just think to ourselves, man, I really wish I could get a house, or I really wish that, I had some property that I could, be on that property ladder with, or be able to, flip these houses and move into other locations. And the whole idea of just even be able to buy a house is just gone for a lot of people. And this is a very concerning condition for a lot of people within the economy, because that home ownership has always been just kind of like something that's rooted down in every single person out there. And I shouldn't say every single person, but generally, if you ask most people if they would like to own a home, their answer would be yes. Now, here's the problem. Like, I can't even buy my own house. Like, if I was sitting in a situation in which that I had to go out there and look for a location to buy, I don't think I could buy the house that I'm living in today. And I just purchased this thing a couple of years ago. This is the situation that we are now facing, and a lot of people are facing. And so when it comes to like being in a house, yeah, it's really awesome that you're there, like if you were able to get in one. But now the chances of being able to move have been taken away, right? Like, if I was to sell this property off, unless I actually took in a lot of, extra cash and equity, being able to find another location in which that I would be able to afford the higher interest rate payment is very low, right? Like, the possibilities have diminished, even for myself, who's owning a home or trying to buy a home, right? So now here you're sitting in a situation in which even if you own a home and you're just trying to get into another place, you may not be able to do that, right? Now you're stuck. And this is where a lot of people are looking at this housing market saying, man, this is a very terrible position for a lot of people to be in. It is. People who are not only in houses won't be able to leave, and then people who want to get in a house have no chance of doing it. This is the situation we are now facing when it comes to the United States and the home ownership capabilities here. They're diminished. They're almost non-existent for a lot of people. And it's sad to say, but there's nothing we can really do about it. Like, we can try and vote some politicians in who are going to change the interest rate setting policies. Okay, well, that might help, but that doesn't bring in more inventory. Right? In fact, what that does is it increases the demand side of things, right? If you make it more capable for the average person to be able to afford the payments on it, well, then that brings in more demand. It doesn't bring in more inventory, right? It's more inventory that's going to bring the prices down and make it capable for the buyer. But that's not something that's really in the cards. So we look at what it is that we need to do in order to acquire a home. Well, then it's going to take more income. And really, when you think about it, unless you happen to have a profession in mind or a family business that you're going to inherit or something of a set plan in motion, it is very difficult to go out there into the workforce, get a good paying job, work that job for a number of years to acquire a down payment to buy a house. Like, what kind of job would you go for if you're not going for one that's a profession? Like, you have to go get a degree to have this particular job, right? You're just an average dude, graduated high school, maybe took some college courses, but don't really have any kind of real set profession in mind. You're just out there just going to go join the workforce. Well, typically, where would you go to try and earn the most money? You would go to a manufacturing job, right? Because manufacturing is good, high-paying jobs, good quality jobs, right? This is what we've always been told when we think about what it is for a middle class person living in the United States. If you had a decent manufacturing job, well, then you might be able to actually participate in that middle class kind of environment. And that's not the case anymore. Even good manufacturing jobs really don't put you into a middle class position. And even when it comes to manufacturing, here in the United States, we're not as competitive. Like, we can see that to be the case right now with all the tariffs and everything that's being inflicted upon China. Everybody's complaining about China. China's the world's manufacturer. That's who manufactures. They're the ones who manufacture the world's stuff, and they are flooding the world with stuff right now, trying to destroy the other manufacturers around the world. This is a strategy that we've talked about. Now, it's not open and it's not communicated out there, but it's pretty obvious when you look at it that China right now is flooding the world with stuff, with their overproduction that has taken place. And even though this might hurt China themselves, this overproduction, it's going to hurt the other manufacturers around the globe even more. So when the dust settles and the manufacturers around the world have gone bankrupt due to the oversupply that China is now inflicting upon the economies around the world, at the end of the day, and the dust settles, China will still have manufacturing. Yes, they will lose a lot of manufacturers too in this process, but they're going to come out in the end with more manufacturers who are viable companies producing for the global economy than anybody else. That's their mission. Now, whether or not they're successful at it, who knows? But the idea that we're going to bring manufacturing back to the United States is a far off concept. Those manufacturing jobs aren't coming back to the United States. And even if they did come back, they're not like good, high-paying jobs that are going to be able to compete against the manufacturers around the world. See, there's no place to live and there's no jobs. Sure, there's houses out there, there's apartments, there's places to be. And there's jobs. You can go work at the service industries, you can work at hotels, you can find places to gain employment. But is it a good, high-paying manufacturing job that can build a strong middle class that can then raise families in their own homes? I don't think so. Like, those possibilities are becoming few and far between for most people. And it's to understand why this situation has taken place is better to know that it comes from economic history lessons like Cantillon's essay on economic theory. That they show exactly the same things that we are experiencing here within the economy, lack of housing for the people, labor that's real expensive, manufacturing jobs that are leaving, foreign production that's moving in. These are all things that have been talked about time and time again. There is no difference except for the way that it appears, considering we have new technologies and the way we communicate look very different, but the underlying economic forces that are taking place right now are very much the same as they were hundreds of years ago. We have to understand this for what it is. Like, if you try to vote people in who are going to bring these good manufacturing jobs back to the United States, they're lying. They can't do it. That's a direct... It's not saying that they can't do it, right? And I shouldn't say that they can't do it. They can do it. It is possible, right? The only issues that are going to come with that is it's going to take ever-increasing amounts of tariffs, like we are experiencing, and it's take ever-increasing amounts of subsidies, like we are experiencing, right? And it's going to take this ever-increasing amounts of government intervention in order to keep this system going, so that there is no overwhelming foreign production that just completely devastates our entire economy. It will always take this government intervention because of the situation we are now in. There's no free market to this anymore, right? Free market is gone. So now as we look to the future and what it is that's going to take place, well, unless we are expecting a total and utter inevitable collapse of the entire system, we can anticipate that we are going to have more government intervention, more tariffs, more subsidies. Right? We're going to have a bigger separation between the rich and the poor. Home prices are going to become increasingly more difficult to acquire. Homes are going to be more difficult to acquire. They're not going to get easier. See, this is like, people ask, like, what is it that we need to do to make homes more affordable? There's nothing you can do. There's a certain amount of supply of inventory, and there's a certain demand, the people who want to move into a house. And there's far more people who want to own a home than there are homes available. And I don't care what you do with the interest rate setting policies or anything else you do out there, you're not going to be able to provide all the homes for all the people who want them. It just doesn't work like that. Now, you can create a situation in which that the purchasing power of the people who typically wouldn't have that purchasing power can be adjusted with the interest rates. And honestly, the problem that ends up taking place is where the people are asking, I need a better capability of moving into a house. Mainly, they need government intervention to provide them with the ability to get a loan that they can pay for. And when you have more people who have the ability to acquire a loan that they could pay for, that is more demand that is being added to the housing market that then drives the prices up, making it ever increasingly more difficult for people to acquire that home. It's unfortunate. It's a really unfortunate situation that we are now facing, but it's better to understand it for what it is, not to try and throw blame or excuses or reasons or anything else behind it. I mean, I guess a reason would be helpful because then we can know why we are where we are, but it doesn't change the fact that this is where we're at. Right? And understanding that if it is home ownership that people are looking for, that they're not going to be able to do it in the traditional fashions. Right? That good manufacturing job that would have provided you with enough money to acquire a home doesn't do it anymore. And it doesn't matter because it's leaving anyway. You wouldn't get that manufacturing job. Now we have to think of different ways like house hacking. We have to think about teaming up with other people. We have to think of ways that our typical 9-to-5 job, which isn't going to cut it, has to work for us. Either we need to work two of them, or we need to team up with other people, or we need to figure out a way that we can then acquire that house and have somebody else make the payment on it, where we live in an RV in the back or in the shop or in the garage or somewhere else, while other people are living in the house making the payment. But guess what? You're at least the owner of that property or becoming an owner of that property. And this is how we do it, because going to your day job and working hard and sacrificing your wants so that you can build up a savings account that then will get you into a house is going to be so hard to do that you may sacrifice your entire life and never ever be able to acquire one, and never enjoy your life, never enjoy anything that you're doing because you were working so hard to try and acquire that home. Just understand it. It's not going to work like that. You have to do something different. Right? And this is the evidence of it. You can see it down in there. I mean, think about even places like France is, complaining about the foreign manufacturing, right? And it's not like even France. I mean, I just said even France because I have an article to that down in the description talking about how France is complaining about the overproduction coming out of China. This is like every nation is going to face the same thing. It's not just France. It's not just the United States. It's not just Germany. It's everybody. Everybody. And now they're all in competition the same way we are. See, if you were a industrious person, like we were, like here in the United States, we are industrious people. We worked really hard. We saved. We reinvested. We were producers, savers. This built a very strong economy. And from that, we wanted to enjoy that. That move into luxuries meant that we were going to start exporting our manufacturing and importing ever-increasing amounts of foreign production. There was very little doubt to some people, the powers that be out there who took advantage of the situation, there was very little doubt in their mind that this was going to happen. And now that I have done the studies that I have to realize that this was an inevitability that was going to take place. It wasn't something that was going to be a maybe. Right? It was just a matter of time. Once the people have increased their manufacturing capabilities, when they are distributing their wonderful products to the rest of the world and they are importing the money from all the hard work that other people have done in order to purchase the products from us, it's only a matter of time before we take that money and we move into luxuries. And that move into luxuries will eventually find the foreign production moving in and the domestic manufacturers moving out. There is no way that it's not going to happen like that. Right? There's ways that you can slow it down. There's ways that you can intervene. There's things that you can do, but you cannot stop the underlying economic forces that are taking place. 400 people watching. My gosh, man. You guys are really digging this one. All right, we got 66 likes with 399 people watching. Go hit that like button when you join in on the live stream. YouTube algorithm will love it. I'm probably going to only be out here for maybe another half an hour at best, because the family wants to go to town and hang out. Even though it's raining today, we'll go find something to do. All right. We want cheap stuff. Absolutely. Everybody wants cheap stuff, you know, and then you have to make the conscious decision to then, like, say, I don't want the cheap stuff. I will spend more money on a higher quality product that is made here in the United States. And there are a lot of people who take that initiative to say, yes, I want to do that. That's not the majority of the people, right? So yeah, you can have some people who do participate in that idea, saying, I only buy American, I only buy local, I only buy, you know, stuff that is going to keep the production and manufacturing here within the United States. But it is very difficult to get the mass amounts of people to do that on a regular basis, right? And to do that generally. If that was the case, right, if we could get people to do that, then if you could do it regularly, consistently for generations, right, then you might be able to reverse some of the issues that are taking place. But it's not going to happen. It just doesn't happen like that, right? You can get a few people to join in, but most people want to enjoy their money with cheaper stuff. All right. You like good shows when TV was acceptable. Jethro, okay. I will drink the cheap stuff. Okay, Simon, if you were president, how would you handle the many crises happening when it comes to the markets and employment, and who would you hire to help? Why? I mean, they wouldn't like me very much, because why would I want to take control over a crashing plane? Like, I wouldn't want to do that. There's nothing I can do that's going to make anything any better for anybody. The things that I would suggest would be political suicide. Like, nobody would get on board with any of my ideas, because what my ideas would be to fix the economy would be so extremely painful for most people that they wouldn't, like, first of all, they would call me crazy, then they would call me dangerous, and then they would say that I'm purposefully doing evil intent to people. All this stuff would come out, because ultimately what you would have to do is you would have to work twice as hard. This is, as president, this is, I mean, you asked me, right? And I mean, because I understand what it is that it's going to take. But as president, I'm going to have to ask that everybody to work twice as hard, right, for half as much, take the money that they do get, which is going to be, you know, a very painful experience on this, and that is to take the money that they do get, buy only the necessities with it. Everything that's left over after buying only necessities, everything that's left over, you take and then pay off debt with it. And this is what we're going to have to do for generations. Like, literally generations of people are going to have to do this and suffer the consequences of working twice as hard than they do now for half as much. The money that they do get, which is half as much, only buy the necessities, and then whatever is left over goes to paying off debt. And we do this literally for generations of people. Like, there might be an entire generation of people who never get to experience any kind of luxurious experience within their life, right? If we can get an entire generation to do that, like maybe, 3 generations into it, then we may come into a position in which that the manufacturing here in the United States would then not only fill our own needs, but then would also be competitive enough to then distribute to the rest of the world as well. However, the US dollar would not be the world reserve currency if that was to take place, because the only reason why we have the world reserve currency is because of the sheer amount of debt that we are going into that provides the world with the safe and liquid asset of the US treasuries. And the only reason that they are using the dollar, or can use the dollar, is because we export dollars by importing stuff. So we have deficit trade. If we didn't have deficit trade, the world wouldn't be using our dollars. If they weren't using our dollars, we wouldn't be able to sell the debt. If we weren't able to sell the debt, we wouldn't be able to buy their stuff. If we weren't buying their stuff, we suffer in misery and poverty. There's nothing we can do. There's literally nothing we can do. As an individual person, I think you should take advantage of the situation and position yourself accordingly, knowing that there is no reversal to this. And even if they did attempt to do it, the misery that would come from it is too painful for anybody to choose to experience. It's just like, it's not going to happen. I don't even try to contemplate the fixing of it. I only contemplate what it is that I need to do for the fact that we are going to have a continuous new money pouring into the system and an ever increasing separation between the rich and the poor. How do I deal with that? Because I can't reverse it. There's nothing that you can do to reverse it. There's nothing that Donald Trump or Biden or any other, possible person out there is ever going to do to reverse that situation without doing what I said, as far as suffering the consequences of working twice as hard for generations of people to buy only necessities and pay off debt. I don't know what you're going to do, man, but I don't want to live that life. I don't want to work twice as hard to buy only necessities and to pay off debt. All that stuff, I've already did that. That's the problems that I was facing up until I was 40 years old. I got myself out of that position. I understand this is what the country's into, but I don't personally have to suffer through that consequence either. Right? I don't have to do it too. 480 people watching, right on. Go hit the like button. We got 125 people hitting the like button, 480 people watching. We should definitely be up to 200 likes right now. All right, universal basic income is needed. Then what do we do? Well, Lily, this is just it, right? You understand the position that we are now in and know that there is nothing that anybody is going to do as far as the external goes that's going to create a situation that's going to make our lives better. Only you can do it. Only you. Only you and the decisions that you make, the places that you go with your money, the investments, the businesses, the things that you are experiencing on a day-to-day, right? This is your life. This is how you do it, right? And if you are anticipating that there's going to be somebody who's going to come into the administration that's going to create a world that's going to be benefiting everybody, it's not going to happen. It straight up will not happen, right? And even the promises that they do make, they never really fulfill them anyhow. You think about it right now. How I don't really look at I don't really look at campaign promises or anything else and saying, hey, you fulfilled these or you didn't fulfill the whatever. I don't look at campaign promises at all. But you think about the situation we are now in right now. Good manufacturing jobs, homes, right? That's it. That's the only thing. Those are the two things: your job and your place of residence. Right? Those are the two biggest concerns. Everybody else could be well, what about society? What about, no, everybody's concerned about two things: their job, their income, and the place that they live. That's it, man. And now, knowing the situation that we are in, the idea of moving into a home or getting a home from your regular job, it just doesn't exist. There's no environment that's going to be created that occurs, right? Without doing the things that I was saying with the regression from buying into luxuries. You have to move back away from that stuff. All right. Moving on. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Yep. Brody, hey Simon, what do you make of the MMT idea of printing up money and using it to contract private housing builders to expand the housing supply? MMT is quite poorly understood, I found. Yeah, and well, here's the thing. Can you really print up money? Is there a way? Let me see if I can say this right here, because the initial idea of it sounds appropriate almost, right? It's just well, the government can pay these builders to build this house or whatever. Okay. Let me see if I can explain this right. If the MMT came in and started moving money towards the builders, right? Then what would end up happening from this position is that the money pouring into the builders themselves you first of all, you would have to have it forced into that direction, meaning like, hey, you got this money, this MMT, you cannot use it for anything other than the building of a home, right? So now all of a sudden you have forced money going into the construction of a home, right? Like you can't use it to do anything else. You can only use it for this. Now, something very interesting is going to start taking place within the building supply industry, knowing that there is money being presented by the government that's forced into a particular direction. Right? Now, it doesn't matter what that product is. Like, I mean, it doesn't even matter if it's home building or whatever, right? That particular product that is being forced into the purchase will move up in price. Now, you can actually use like baby formula as an example of this, right? So when it comes to like some of the subsidies that women with children get, right? So like, make sure that they have plenty of nourishing food for a new mother with her child. So it's basically like a food stamp kind of thing. Right? Now there's two different types of formula that can be purchased with this particular program. Those two particular formulas are by far the most expensive ones. Well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because the purchasing of them is being subsidized by the state. Like if you can only purchase these two, and here's some free money, right? Money that you didn't earn to go and purchase them, well, then the demand for those are going to be quite extreme. Supply and demand, right? Higher prices. Now you take it back to the person who didn't receive that stuff, right? They're sitting looking at this formula that should not cost this much. It should be much cheaper. But because the state subsidizes it, the price of it is much more. And if you want one of those two, which are the better ones, right, you're going to end up paying a higher price for it. Same thing with like what would happen in construction, right? If you have government subsidies moving into a particular direction of it, then what's going to end up happening with it, although it may seem easier on us because we didn't actually come up with the money, right? As an individual, what will happen on the grander economy is that those house prices will move up. It will make it even more difficult for those who don't have access to the subsidy. Yeah. See, it won't make it better. The only thing that can make it better, right, is for the industriousness of the people themselves, right? Those who are hardworking individual people who produce and save, they will create an environment that will then make it easier for everybody to start to own a home, right? But it has to come from that production and savings. Once the elevation of standard of living has moved up, people have produced and saved, acquired a savings that they can now use to elevate their life. That right there is the move that will then eventually bring in the inevitable collapse. Right? And like, as much as we can try and regulate and control and deal with that situation, it's the underlying economic force that has taken place that we do have to understand. Like you can subsidize it with MMT, you can come up with all kinds of regulations to try and prevent the incoming foreign production, you can try and subsidize the domestic demand, you can try and do all these things, and it will give an appearance of helping, right? But it doesn't negate the fact that the underlying economic forces are still at play, and in fact they're growing while that's taking place, right? That means ever increasing amounts of tariffs, ever increasing amounts of subsidies, in order to deal with the ever building economic force that is underlying. And there's nothing that can really change that. Like you can alleviate the problem for some time. You can give it the appearance that you might even get a whole generation. People will be like, no, it's proven to work, right? But eventually at some point, those natural economic forces will come through. It's very much like gravity and the plane running out of fuel, right? The moment that it doesn't operate, the mechanics don't work, the fuel isn't there, the natural forces will kick in and have a definite outcome to it. Thank you so much for the $5 from PK Psalms. Let's see here. Simon, I posed a Q&S via Super Thanks in your second video. I think you missed, is it possible for low yield and high Fed funds rates to exist at the same time? I apologize. I did see that notification, and I do thank you very much for the $5. I do appreciate you posing that question. Let me see. Let me get this right. So the low yield and high Fed funds rates. Now, are you talking like the low yielding treasuries, like something in that nature, as opposed to the Fed funds rate? Um, I don't know if that would even. I mean, it does take place at times, but I don't know if that could actually be something that would be a continuous feature of the economy, where you would have high Fed funds rate and a low yielding treasury. Um, but I guess like the question behind it is that is it possible for to exist at the same time? I mean, I think it's possible for it to exist at the same time, but it wouldn't be like any kind of feature to the economy that would be everlasting. Ultimately, like the Fed funds rate would be like the lowest interest rate that would be accepted at the banks, right? So ultimately, like if a bank is going to loan money to somebody, it's going to be the Federal Reserve, which would have the lowest interest rate attached to it, being the safest place that you could possibly put your money. And then from there, it would start becoming higher risk. So if the Fed moved their interest rate up, this would be the place that the banks would want to put their money most likely if it was a higher yield than what the treasuries would be yielding, right? See, like typically, like the Fed funds rate would be below those treasury yields, and then if the bank wanted to acquire a little bit more yield, they would take on a little bit of risk by moving into the treasury. So, could it exist? I mean, I guess it could exist for a short amount of time, but I don't find that to be a lasting feature of the economy, and it certainly wouldn't give the Federal Reserve any kind of real interest rate control, whatever that is, over the economy if they couldn't adjust the Fed funds rates in relation to the U.S. Treasuries, meaning that if they brought the Fed funds rate up, that would then take the risk from the banks to say, hey, man, these interest rates are now riskier in the U.S. Treasuries than they are in the Fed funds. But if the Fed funds rate has a yield that's higher than the Treasuries, then that doesn't really make sense in the overall banking system of how the financial, conditions work within the markets. Usually the Fed is the lowest interest rate, bringing the base in, and then everything else after that is a higher interest rate. So could it exist? Yeah, but I don't think it would be any long-lasting feature of the economy, as the banking system wouldn't be functioning appropriately in accordance to what the Federal Reserve would be doing to try and maintain the interest rate setting policies. Did I get all that right? Wow, look at all these comments. Okay, UE, would you agree that deflationary episodes would be needed to justify a return to the lower bound Fed funds? I mean, justifying going to the lower bound, is that something like something that they are wanting, you think? Like, would you agree that deflationary episode would be needed to justify a return to the lower bound on the Fed funds? Like what would it take in the economy to have the Federal Reserve bring the Fed funds rate back down to the lower bound of zero? I think would be a very deflationary force, or recessionary pressures, or collapsing in liquidity, or something of that nature, which would then try to bring some sort of stimulative effect to the economy. That would be the lowering of interest rates. So if the question is like, would it be a major deflationary event that would then trigger the lower bound setting? Then I would imagine that would be one of them. But I don't really think that the Federal Reserve is much interested in adjusting interest rates anymore. Like, I think the idea of it is very prevalent within the Fed's monetary policies. But the actual adjustment of interest rates, I don't think is really an effective tool anymore. Like, they've kind of proven that already. Like, the lowering of interest rates, which would typically create an issue with inflation that a lot of people had pretty much given excuse to here over the last, 4 years, but really failed the Federal Reserve over the previous decade, right? So like here they printed up a bunch of money and it didn't produce the inflationary scenario that they were looking for, right? And now even though they lowered interest rates to zero and unemployment fell to historically low rates, it still failed to produce the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. So typical adjustment of interest rates would be their inflationary, like, uh, would be the tool that they would use for adjustment of inflation, right? So like if the Federal Reserve wanted to create an inflationary scenario within the economy, what they would do is lower interest rates. That lower interest rates would then spark the business investment out there, right? These businesses would have lower interest rates that they could take advantage of. They could then go out there and expand their operations and hire people. By hiring people, what ends up happening is that with more people working, more people have money to consume. That added consumption starts to create the supply-demand imbalances, and then you have the price inflation that's a reflection of that. Right? But it's not the consumer that the Federal Reserve is looking to mess with. I mean, it is, but it's the employment. The consumer comes from employment, right? So if they can get the unemployment to fall, then they can get the consumer to rise. If they can get the consumer to rise, then you'll have inflationary pressures from that, right? Same thing in the reverse. If they can get unemployment to rise, then that will bring like less jobs to the market, right? Less people earning money. If there's less people earning money, there'll be less consumption. If less consumption takes place, then supply comes more in line with the demand. And then you have prices start to reflect that, and usually they're coming down or stop going up, right? And this is what the Federal Reserve looks at. But if the interest rate adjustments doesn't mess with the unemployment or the employment of it, like you can mess with, interest rates all you want, but the unemployment doesn't change on it, then their monetary policy is ineffective. Like it doesn't work. It just simply doesn't work anymore. Right? And this is what I find very amusing when I see a lot of people talking about when the Fed is going to go cut rates and what it's going to do. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not the policy anymore. Like it used to be. Very much that's what it was. But over the last few years, and the longer we sat at the lower bound of zero, the less effective the adjustment of monetary policy through the interest rate adjustments was taking place. Like the Fed tried to adjust interest rates and it didn't create the scenario that would typically have done. And so I understand this now. It was very difficult for me for a long time to wrap my head around it. But then once I got it, it was just like, okay, I see. The interest rates, like typically the adjustment of that would then reflect into the economy, the inflationary or deflationary powers or pressures that existed there was from that interest rate adjustments into the employment or unemployment, which then led to the consuming, which then led to the prices, right? But it was the step that it took. So now that it's not an effective tool, the idea being presented out there does start to impact the markets, the people's behaviors, what it is that they are planning on doing. And so understanding it from that fashion is a much different strategy than what most people are taking on. Like they take on this idea, it's just like, when are they going to cut rates? They're going to cut in September, and by how much? And I'm thinking, that doesn't matter. Like that part is inconsequential, really. It doesn't really even adjust monetary policy anymore, the adjustment of interest rates. The perception does, right? That does impact the markets, and it impacts it in a major way. And again, like trying to communicate that out, trying to, explain how that operates is very difficult because people are so accustomed to the way that the Federal Reserve used to operate with the adjustment of interest rates as being the monetary policy, as being this is the tool. And it just doesn't work, but the idea does. The idea of it works, right? The balance sheet adjustment works, right? That's actual them physically, participating within the markets, whether they're buying or unloading treasuries, right? That part works. The forward guidance, that really works, the whole jawboning, signaling thing. But the adjustment of interest rates, not so much. Not really, And then even if they did to lower rates, like this is something that, how many people we have watching? Okay, 519, that's cool, that's a lot of people. Okay, so this is something, if you're new to my channel, you've never seen this before, you never heard me talk, right? Here's one thing that I have come to the understanding of is that the lowering of interest rates, even if they were to lower them right now, even if they were to cut it 1, 2, 3 interest points, right? They took it from 5% down to 3%, right? 2%. Still would not stimulate the economy. right? Even a major cut, like this came right out and said, hey, we're going to cut it 2 percentage points. Still wouldn't stimulate the economy, right? The idea of it would, markets would go out there and start, participating in a way as if that, was a major impact. But the problem that most people are not understanding or seeing is that there is a neutral interest rate, the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, right? And here's the problem. The Fed doesn't know what that interest rate is. Like they have a guess, they have a good guess about it, and it's called R star, right? Literally R, like, letter R star, right? And with this R star, they can have a guess on where the neutral interest rate is. But that neutral interest rate is really close to zero. And in fact, if you read this speech right here, Monetary Policy for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World, he even says that the interest rate, let me see, how does he put it? Today's low neutral interest rate reflects a culmination of trends extending back 25 years. A quarter century ago, a typical estimate of the neutral rate in the United States was 2 to 2.5%. Consistent with historical averages over the preceding half century. Since then, however, there has been clear downward trend in the neutral interest rate in the United States and other advanced economies, with current estimates ranging from 0 to 1.5%. Now, granted, this was given 2018, November of 2018, but it's the fact that the neutral interest rate was close to 0 to 1.5%. Now, you think about it, if the inflation expectation remains elevated for a significant amount of time, it will raise the neutral interest rate. But even if it was to raise off of 0 to 1.5% or even 2% right now, dropping of interest rates would have to go significantly below the neutral interest rate. Not to the neutral. I mean, even if they were to drop it right now to 2%, and we assume that neutral is at 2%, they would be neutral. In order to stimulate the economy, they have to get below neutral, and you have to drop it significantly below neutral, right? And if you start dropping below neutral, you're going to run into the lower bound of 0, which means that monetary policy doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Like all these people who are looking for interest rate cuts coming into the future and how they're going to impact the economy and at what time and by how much and all this other stuff are off the rocker. Right? There is no stimulation coming from the dropping of interest rates unless you can get below the neutral interest rate. The Fed knows this. Nobody else seems to really know it. Like, I don't really see anybody out there in the mainstream media and the economists who talk about, like, well, when the Federal Reserve gets below the neutral interest rate a significant amount, we can stimulate the economy. Nobody talks like that, right? They're all anticipating that there's going to be a couple of interest rate cuts coming into the future, and somehow that's going to be stimulating the economy. It won't be. The Fed will still be in a restrictive, non-accommodative position, even with interest rate cuts. Now, give it time. If time was to continue to go on, I don't know how much, right? I mean, a year, 10 years, I have no idea, right? As time goes on and inflation expectation remains elevated, it will draw the neutral interest rate up, right? It will pull that neutral interest rate ever closer to the Fed funds rate. So as time goes on and the inflation expectation remains elevated and the neutral interest rate begins to rise and the Federal Reserve doesn't move, they sit still with their Fed funds rate, what we will find is an economy that becomes less restrictive over time as the neutral interest rate becomes ever closer to the Fed funds. Okay? Then, if we do have that situation where the neutral interest rate rises and becomes ever increasingly closer to the Fed funds rate, makes the economy less restricted, and we do go into a downturn, the dropping of Fed funds rate could drop below the neutral interest rate significantly enough to actually stimulate the economy, like people would anticipate. But the key to that is it takes time and pressure to raise that neutral interest rate. Time and an inflation expectation that remains elevated. This is the problem that the Fed faced, right? Again, like if you've heard me on this channel before, then you've heard me say this many times. And again, this is probably one of the best speeches that you can go and read. It's Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World, November 30th, 2018. Today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. That is, the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, The problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. So now if you understand why the inflation expectation was persistently too low, creating the problems for the Federal Reserve, you can now see it from that neutral interest rate. If inflation expectation remains low, the neutral interest rate falls. The closer it gets to zero, the less effective monetary policy is for the Federal Reserve. So dropping of interest rates doesn't work. It's not like, even if they were to do it, it wouldn't matter, right? It would matter some, but it's not going to stimulate the economy, not like what people are thinking. Yeah. The idea does. And that's what's so crazy about it. Is just like, it's so amazing to me that it's not the actual adjustment, but the belief, the understanding, the perception that people have of what that does to the economy that actually is stimulating the economy, right? That's what's so mind-blowing about this whole thing, and that's where it's proof that it's not them, it's us. We are the economy. We make the difference. We are the ones who set this. And it's proof right there that if they can have a monetary policy that is adjusted by their words, it's our perception that is now being the actual effect in the economy, because the adjustment of interest rates doesn't do it. It's so, man, like, explaining this one is probably one of the hardest things to try and get out there, because really you have to break your understanding of what it is that you already know about the Federal Reserve and how the monetary policy works. You have to break that understanding in order to establish a new way of thinking. Yeah. All right. Man, 529 people? This is amazing. All right, guys, I'm not going to give it too much longer, although I'd love to stay out here and hang out. The family wants to go get something to eat. So I love to grow food, and I am also a professional sewer. Banks, maybe Sawyer. All right. Banks being able to create deposits out of thin air, out of nothing, but the demand for the loan prevents the central bank being able to control the money supply. Dropping does nothing, promotes higher prices, wars, and jack up cost and services more. All right, I'm hungry too, Simon. It's noon here too. Yeah, it's time. All right, you're making perfect sense, Simon. Well, thank you very much, Brody. Can you talk about the ban of England? The ban of England. Talk about the ban. I don't know what that was. All these new immigrants will love a fresh new credit record. There's how the debt will continue. Kidding around. Late start wealth. All right, save, but in physical assets that are useful and hopeful, liquid, remarketable, rice stores well. UE seems to have a good head for a youngster. I'm 47 years old. I mean, I'm not that young, right? Does anybody like corn? Who doesn't like corn? I think I'm going to have a bumper crop this year. Go to your Lambert economy. Sup, bro? I need to say this. You know your thing. All right. Thanks, Lumberjack. You're one of the 5 channels I watch most. Right on. Yep. All right. Nothing like farm. If you can't afford a house, try living in a teepee. All right. We need 500 likes. Come on, people. Come on, people. Yeah, thank you so much for hitting that like button. We got 514 people watching right now. Don't work for the boss, man. Work for yourself. Come see me. I will show you. All right, when are you going to restock the UE hats in the online store? That's what's interesting. Like, I mean, I don't deal with anything when it comes to Teespring. We just design the merchandise and then put it out there, and then they take care of everything. They design, like, they create the shirts, they ship them out, they do all that other stuff. I didn't know that they were out of stock on them, so maybe we can design some new ones. and figure it out so that we can get some hats sold. I say it a lot, but you're the best, Simon. Thank you again. Well, thank you, Brody, for being here, man. I really appreciate you guys. Are we as deep in trouble as it seems? I make middle class income, and I am sunk sort of in debt. Yeah, I mean, I think the separation between the rich and the poor, that gap, right, that has taken place due to the new money that has come in, due to the rise in luxuries, due to the exportation of our manufacturing, due to the importation of foreign production, all that stuff like isn't reversing. So if that's bad, yeah, it's bad. It's bad as it seems, right? And it's probably going to get worse. What's up, the Ramirez team? Been a minute. Right on. Okay. Owen says if you have personal debt, you need to get rid of it as soon as possible. Yeah, I agree. Simon, what is more profitable for the Fed, higher inflation or low inflation? You know, what's funny about it is that I would imagine that, well, right now the Fed is not profitable, and in fact they're in remittance to the Treasury, so they owe the Treasury. They're in the red to the Treasury right now. So right now they're not a profitable organization. They're operating in the red. Now it will give it time. They will get it all back and pay back the Treasury for it. But right now, yeah, the Federal Reserve is actually a losing operation as of right now. All right. Either inflate or die. Yeah, that's... Okay, guys, this was a lot of fun. I really wish I could hang out here and keep going. We have 500 people watching, which is just a great live stream to have going. 288 likes, $3.71 in super chat, because you guys are always so generous with those super chats and in supporting the Uneducated Economist. Let's see. Exciting. Gonna get prepared to go to the Rebel Capitalist here in a few days. Still haven't got anything prepared to speak, so I'm just gonna kind of wing it, I think, but I'll be all right. I'm gonna do the same thing that I had done at the Silver Symposium and then over at Zuber's One Rental at a Time. So I'll basically talking about the four economic theories, credible threats, and then possibly flexible average inflation targeting, since nobody really seems to know much about that. But anyway, that's my plans for the week, and thank you all for being here. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.